Good afternoon. Welcome. I wish I could see your faces better. I can't. I can just see heads, so I'll pretend. My name is Ellen Cowan, and I am an innovation specialist at AWS. And I have the pleasure today of being here with Sean Colombo of Duolingo. And we're going to talk to you about culture and the culture of experimentation. And how does culture and experimentation work together to drive innovation? And so we're going to make this a dialogue. We have some slides to help us along the way, and so you can follow on some key points we're trying to make. But we're also going to just have a conversation. And we have about 40 minutes of content, I think, in the conversation. And then we will really want to take questions and open it up for a dialogue in the room at the end. So if you have some questions, write them down or keep them at hand. Maybe take a digital note, and then we'll have an opportunity for that as we go along. So by way of introduction, a little bit more about me, and then I really want to hear from Sean. I work with our innovation transformation team at AWS, and we have a team of quite a few of us worldwide who have backgrounds in product strategy, digital innovation, and we are bringing our knowledge of what has been done elsewhere and how people can work on product to the customer conversation with AWS and our customers who want to innovate and who want to work on how they deliver product and innovate more in the cloud. But we're also bringing a knowledge and a study of how Amazon does innovation, brings innovation to the edge, our product-oriented operating model, very customer-centric, product-centric way of working, and the culture that goes along with it. And we have dialogues with customers to figure out where can we do better together and how can we support you. So I will be, over the course of the conversation, reflecting on some insights about how Amazon innovates to the extent that it is actually a beautiful match to how Sean's team is working and why they are experiencing incredible growth. And so the question is, how did Duolingo grow 10x users over 6 years and 2x stock price over 2? And the answer is through product iteration and experimentation. And so we want to bring some of the knowledge of how they did that to you and hopefully inspire some growth in your own organizations. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ellen. Hi, I'm Sean Colombo. I've been with Duolingo for about 7.5 years, and I spent about 5.5 of those working on growth. Prior to Duolingo, I have a startup background. I was in 4 startups. I founded 2 of them myself. So Duolingo is now the largest company I've ever been at 800 people. For Duolingo itself, if anyone's not familiar with it, it's a language learning app which has become the largest edtech app in the world. It was founded or launched about 12 years ago. The founders are Luis von Ahn and Severin Hacker. Luis was also famous for doing reCAPTCHA, which is that little box you click that says you're not a robot, in which he sold to Google. And he was the PhD advisor for Severin Hacker, and then they kind of made Duolingo as their PhD project, and it went from there.
Okay, fabulous. So we are going to talk about customers and product and the intersection with experimentation and innovation. Some of what we're going to talk about is how culture sets tone, how experiments lead to growth, how customers have to come first. We're going to talk about something really fun, which is I love, which is copy and then innovate. New idea that Sean kind of brought my way, and I said that makes a lot of sense. Embracing a product centricity in the work we do, and the fact that engineering really matters. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that aren't engineering, but at the end of the day, the approach to engineering definitely matters. Sean is VP of engineering, and also, interestingly, a real ambassador for the culture shift and culture change and culture that has become established at Duolingo, if I understood the process correctly.
I hope so.
Okay, fantastic. Coming from engineering. So really, we're also going to talk about how experiments lead to growth. And I just want to take a moment and look at the chart here, because that is a growth curve. And for anybody who's not familiar with looking at charts day in and day out, I think it's still readily apparent that that is a very steep and good growth curve for any organization. So I wanted to have Sean talk to us a little bit about when did this start and what happened before this. And this is essentially the picture of your 6x users and 2x stock price growth So tell us a little bit about this.
Thanks. So this chart kind of begins in 2018, which is when I started on growth. Before that, there was still the really hard mission of going from 0 users to finding product market fit and getting a first couple million. But like right at the beginning there is summer of 2018, and at that point, our growth had slowed to about 4% year over year, which is kind of frightening. We're starting to wonder maybe we've saturated the market of all the language learners in the world. This was about 3.5 million DAUs. Our latest public numbers are that we're expecting to finish out the year closer to 40 million. So I guess we hadn't saturated it quite yet. And we're actually pretty confident now that it's going to go for a while. So we did a bunch of stuff to try to turn this around. A lot of it related to experimentation kind of helped us find our way and reignite it.
How do you know whether you've saturated a market or not? I think a lot of companies ask themselves that, like, what is the total addressable market, or have we hit a point at which there's not a saturation, or what is our hypothesis about what more we could do? How did you think through that?
I think one of the main ways that it worked for us is someone I worked with, Jorge Mazal, he was our chief product officer at the time. He brought in a thing called a growth model from Zynga, which models out all the inputs to your business. So, how many new users do we get? How many resurrected users? What's the new user retention rate, the current user retention rate? And you have this giant model just in a spreadsheet. And then we started tweaking it and seeing where the model was sensitive. So for our current size, why were our old new user experiments not working anymore? And it turned out it was because now the percentage of new users was so much smaller than the percentage of our current users. We defined our current users as people who are here today and one other time in the last week. So they're pretty active. So we found out that if we moved the retention rate for those current users, it would have a big impact on the business. So that was like a tip to us that maybe there was some movement there. So what we did is we started experimenting and seeing, is that metric something that we could move? So the metric had been flat for a year, so it wasn't moving on its own. We ran a couple experiments and we were able to start moving it. So that told us, it's not over just yet. There's still some room to grow.
The metrics conversation is really interesting. I believe you organize teams now around metrics and delivery of metrics or achievement of metrics as opposed to features. And I work with a lot of product teams at AWS customers, and this is a common conversation, which is how do we organize our teams? Do we organize around features, which has been commonly the case, the way that many teams have organized, or should we be organizing around metrics? And the difference is that if you're organizing around features, there's like sort of a box you're in, and you're kind of modifying features, but the features are the goal, and so how much can you modify? If you're focusing on metrics, you can really experiment with better ways to achieve metrics and actually change your feature set to be the feature set that actually delivers the metrics. So it gives you a lot more room. Is that sort of how you guys have looked at it, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good point. There's lots of smart people who disagree with me, but I found that at Duolingo, for us, teams that move metrics and target a specific metric have worked out a lot better. A good example is we have a team that works on our leaderboard, which we'll talk more about the leaderboard in a bit. And if we had a team whose job it was to work on the leaderboard, they would change different things that were, making the leaderboard look nice or do things that they think would be important. But instead, we have a team whose job it is to move the amount of time learners spend per day learning well. So how much time are they actually spending learning? So looking at the leaderboard doesn't count, and looking at other things doesn't count, but how much time are they in the lessons? So they focus on that metric, and it's helped tell them what to change about the leaderboard in order to make it better.
Right, or is a leaderboard gonna maybe at some point have to sunset because it's not effective anymore, and do you need to do something else? Keeping your eye on the metrics. And we like to, I think about when I talk to customers, think about how the metrics and delivering customer delight through metrics that matter to the customer translate pretty quickly to value to the business. If you're delivering customer value and it's measurable, that should translate to business value, right? And so you can kind of anchor your team's success that way. Okay, so we're going to talk about testing and trying. It's really important, running scalable experiments. Maybe even your platform for experiments, if we can remember to fit that in. Continuous innovation, and the importance of iterative engineering in this process, and this product-centric focus. And this last piece, which is that engagement leads to monetization, and then to stability, and then to sustainability. So engagement, monetization, sustainability. Talk to us about that piece a little bit, because that's interesting.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so the engagement leading to the monetization and then the stability.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we found that there's kind of a flywheel between all of our metrics in that way. So as we get our users to spend more time in the app and to come back on more days, they also drive more monetization. So that lets us invest more in more people, which we can then use to increase engagement, and it just keeps going.
So engagement is the thing. Keep driving the engagement, and the rest follows along.
Yep, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, from the growth perspective, I'm sure monetization also values their part of.
But if we're engaging the customers and we're driving the value, the benefit that they're looking for, and engaging them in that way, that's the model for why we develop the products the way we do, because that translates to money, right? So the monetization will come. So absolutely. So it starts with culture, and we're here to talk about culture, experimentation. I wanted to just reflect on the conversation I have with customers on a regular basis in terms of how Amazon organizes our own culture of innovation. We think of culture of innovation having 4 key pillars, and there's also a product-centric wraparound to the whole thing. So our 4 pillars are the culture itself, things like leadership principles or mental models, the way in which we think about how we do our work, what it means to work where we do, what teams are expecting of us, how to show up, as well as mental models that go along with that, like the commonly held beliefs or beliefs that we could foster that really serve our purposes well. And then there's the mechanism piece, which is like how we actually, like our processes, how we actually mechanize ways of doing things which give enough structure but also enough room for autonomous work and experimentation and improvements along the way, so we're always improving. The organization, how we organize our teams to be mission-driven based on metrics-driven missions that matter to customers and therefore are good for the business. And then the architecture, which is how we're, the engineering piece. How are we thinking about using technology, and how is that pervasively, beliefs that are held pervasively in the business across not just the builders, but everybody in terms of how do we use technology and what are our beliefs about that. And then there's this product-driven wraparound, which is that when it all comes together, we're very product-centric in how we solve any problem, making sure that any problem we're solving has this mission-driven alignment to value for customers, that if you're doing anything, you can measure why it's good for customers and therefore for the business, and that's a very product-centric mindset. So we're going to reflect on this as we go through the conversation, because I was really taken by our initial conversations and then some research I did about what you've published previously on the topic of experimentation and culture at the parallels between this way of thinking. And so if it's okay with you, I'm just going to anchor it on that. And as a follow-up to anybody here, if you want to talk to Amazon about culture along the lines of these topics, we're very willing and interested to have that conversation. So it starts with culture, meaning mission, and then principles of operation, right? So the mission and the principles are really, really important. At Amazon, our mission is to be Earth's most customer-centric company, and we have 16 leadership principles, which are how we, from a culture perspective, operate to be innovative problem solvers in service of customer obsession. Tell us about your mission, and then we'll get into the principles, because it turns out Duolingo also has operating principles. Yep. Really similar concept.
Yeah, very similar. So our mission, this is kind of an external mission that we see in some places. It kind of smushes marketing into it. Internally, we like to say that our mission is to build the world's best education and make it universally available. And having that kind of thing to drive us as our North Star for everyone, that makes it a lot easier. And like Ellen was saying, it feeds into the operating principles that we have. Like those are how we're going to accomplish the mission.
Let's talk about the operating principles.
Sounds good.
We have 12. Let's introduce everybody to Duo. Explain Duo.
Okay, so Duo is our green owl mascot, and those are all Duo. He's been our mascot from.
I kind of wish we had a stuffed Duo, a big green stuffed Duo on stage with us.
Yeah, they started selling one like this big now.
Yeah. So I love how you built Duo into a visual depiction of your principles. That's interesting. We don't have that. Ours are written in text, but I really love the character that brings forward. So tell us about some of these.
So one of our kind of a chorus is kind of near the center there, this learners first, and that's one of our most important. First, I'll take a step back and kind of say, like, all 12 of these, the concept was to choose 12 principles where you could take the opposite opinion and it would still be pretty reasonable. we found if we said something that was really obvious and everyone agreed on, it wouldn't be as helpful. So we wanted to choose things that were controversial, and they would help us make decisions. So learners first is a good example of that, where if we're having a discussion about a feature and it really is kind of like short-sighted or more for like hitting a quarterly goal or something like that, people can just say, learners first, it's probably better to do it the other way. And that does a really good job of helping people get to a decision really fast. And that's kind of the idea with all of these directionally.
Learners being the customers.
Yep.
They're learning.
We call our users learners.
Yeah, so we have a customer obsession principle, right? Which is customers come first, customer obsession. So that learners first rings really familiar for me. Tell me about the superstar in the center with the spotlight. Never
settle on talent. Yeah, so that's another one where you could definitely take the opposite opinion. So we hire very, very slowly. We are headquartered in Pittsburgh too, so a lot of people are going to like move to Pittsburgh. So it's a big investment from their end too. So we're not going to. Some people just hire quickly and fire quickly. That's not really our approach. We hire nice and slow, and it comes with trade-offs. I guarantee that people we've interviewed would have been great fits, and some of them we said no to because we have such a tight funnel on that. But it does, once people are in, it makes a very good culture where you can really depend on each other, and there's not a whole bunch of time wasted on as much performance-related stuff.
On that topic of talent, taking your time and having them be present and experimentation, it's true, right, that you find it's better to be people to be together?
Yeah.
So let's talk about return to office.
Yeah, so we did a return to office. We're currently hybrid, so we're about 3 and 2 right now, but people are encouraged to also come in on Mondays, so that one's optional. So for us, it was just, we found that during the pandemic, we did the remote thing, and it went okay, but our innovation kind of decreased. So we were executing pretty well, and all the things that we were already working on were going well for us, but we hadn't figured out a way to build kind of new innovations the way that it comes from the spontaneous conversations that people were having around the office.
Okay, fantastic. Talk to me about the tangle of cable there. That's my favorite one, actually, is reduce complexity up on the upper left there.
Yeah.
I love the idea of reducing complexity and getting really specific on what we're trying to execute, but talk to us about that one.
Yeah, so that's a fun one. So it's used in a couple ways. One is about taking a complex problem and trying to solve it with a simple answer. So that's a big approach to it. But it's also about going back and revisiting things that we've already released or things that we're supporting. There was a cost that comes with those, both in terms of time and like divided attention. So we have a team right now, a cleanup crew, that's going back, and after each session, you get a little screen that'll tell you, extended your streak, and here's your stats. And there's a handful of screens. So there's a team that's just like cleaning up the number of screens. Even though all of those screens won an experiment when they were launched, they were helping in some way, the team is now going back to revisit which ones are still effective and which ones could we take away with only a little bit of a hit to kind of reduce our overall complexity.
It's really interesting. We're going to hear about a lot of experimentation. And then it's interesting to think if we're constantly launching new things because we're constantly experimenting and finding things have incremental improvement for us and the compound effect of that, where do we then go back and simplify, right? Because it could be very complex at the end of that. So that's really cool. We're gonna review a few of these further as we go on, but tell me the last one on this page, because I'm a really big believer in EQ and good debates and difficult conversations. Tell me about candid kind.
Yeah, so our principle of be candid and kind, it's a very kind culture. There's not a lot of jerks. That's intentional. And also, it comes with this caveat where if you're too kind, some people will avoid giving hard feedback. But we wanted to make the point that you have to be able to deliver that feedback in order to actually be kind. Just ignoring some feedback for somebody is not kind to them in the long run. So we have to be candid and kind, and that creates this culture where it's also easier to get that feedback because it's not judgy, it's not presented in a kind of mean way. So
that's a learning culture, really and that's also an experimentation culture because we can't experiment if it's not safe to fail. One of the biggest things that when I talk to customers about is they ask about failure because we say failure and invention are inseparable twins, right? And if you knew that an experiment was going to work, it wasn't an experiment. Don't kid yourself. Experiments mean we might fail, we might succeed, but what we definitely do is make progress on understanding the problem and a potential path to solution. And sometimes we understand the problem in new ways because we bothered to experiment, and that's really important insight. So we want to be doing that. We want to be experimenting, but it is really important to have an empathetic and psychologically safe culture where people are honest about their response to all of that and candid and kind, and set the tone for that. So super important. We can't have experimentation without warmth for failure and valuing that it's learning.
That's a great point.
Okay, so now we have this thought at Amazon, this thing we call durable customer needs, like durable needs of customers. That if you focus on the durable needs of customers, those needs that are going to be present in terms of delivering value to your customer for a very long time, it really helps to focus your experimentation and to focus where should you be putting an effort. You, I believe, talk about strategic advantage, which I think is a really similar concept. So I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about that. Like, how do you identify your strength, differentiate with it, and then have that be where you keep, going back in terms of how you're anchoring your work and your experimentation?
Yeah, so this kind of line of thought came from reading Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummel. And he will explain that a lot better than I do if you're interested in reading more on the topic. But basically, he pointed out that strategy is not a plan. It's looking at the kind of the ecosystem you're in and looking at your position and seeing how your unique position can, like what strategy can you use to inside the given ecosystem to thrive. So I thought a lot about this and what it is with Duolingo. Our CEOs mentioned in the past that one of our main competitors is not just other language apps. It's like Instagram or TikTok. It's anywhere else someone wants to spend their time when they pull out their phone. So I thought a lot about this and like what's different about us from them. And the difference is, no one's downloading Candy Crush and saying, oh, I really hope I'm still playing this game in a year. That's just not a thought that they have. They're like there to have fun on Candy Crush. But people download Duolingo and they would love to still be pushing on it in a year. So that's kind of our strategic advantage. Our users want to build a healthy habit, learning the language. So we use that and it drives a lot of our possible experiments that we can come up with. So when we're sending push notifications, we're kind of partnering with the learner on that. So the one notification that we send every day if you remain active is reminding you about your streak, because that's really important to learners. Is they want to build that habit and we want to help them do it.
It's interesting because it's like a lot of companies are using notifications but trying to kind of hide the fact that they're doing it. People don't want to be overcome with notifications, so it's like, how can I deftly get my notification in there? And this is a completely different situation where the user is delighted to be knowing that they're on their streak. They appreciate the nudge. They appreciate the notification. So understanding what learners need and that their intention is to build a habit, super important, and your strategic advantage. Mm-hmm. That's great. So I want to talk about bias for action. Our leadership principle at Amazon for Bias for Action says that speed matters in business. So we really, really, really want to embrace calculated risk-taking and move forward with our experiments and our progress once we have our missions clear. And you have something called Ship It. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about Ship It.
Yeah, so that's our operating principle that it's really focused on. It means a couple of things. So one is that there's a lot of compound growth in experimentation. So if you're working on a giant feature and you want to ship it after 3 months, so a whole quarter, and then at the end it doesn't work out, like that was a pretty big investment. And even now, after we've learned so much, we only launch about half of our experiments. So failure is like, it's part of the system, it's expected. But instead, if you could take that project and find out what's the smallest chunk of that project that, it's polished, it's not like half done, but it's a smaller subset of features that would prove the question you're trying to ask, like whether this is a good route to go down. So we run that in, say, a month, and you launch that. If it failed, you only wasted a month. And if you launch it, you start getting those gains immediately. So you have, like, say, a 1% improvement on your attention. So now you're getting 1% more people the next day and 1% more the next day. And that really adds up over those next 2 months. And then even those people are also causing word of mouth, so you're getting new users in. So that makes a really big difference. And then as a company, we're running, say, 300 experiments at any given time. So you start compounding that by all of these experiments, and it really adds up.
Okay, I'm going to pause here and just restate. As a company, we are running 300 experiments at a time. I can't even see all your hands, but I know that if I asked you to raise your hand if your company runs 300 experiments at a time and you know about them, I bet very few people in the room would be raising their hand. That is extraordinary. And part of why you can do it is, first of all, defining an experiment as being a good experiment because it might only have an incremental gain. but knowing that compound incremental gains really add up exponentially, that makes a lot of sense. So you take the pressure off of defining an experiment to say, small experiment could be good, let's try it out. The other thing is, how do you have a platform, or where are you doing 300 experiments? And what does it look like to launch an experiment? Where do I go to do it? And what if it didn't work? How do I kill it? Like, explain to us the actual experience on at Duolingo of launching an experiment.
Sure. So we have a custom internal thing. It's very similar to some third-party things like Mixpanel, if you're familiar with that. We were using third-party systems a long time ago, and then we kind of started to hit the edge of what they were capable. We just logged so much data because this has been part of our culture from the beginning. We were just logging way too many events and running too many experiments. So it was starting to slow down. So we made an internal version made for throughput, and it's really been customized for our needs since then. So it's been great, and it makes it so that engineers just put like one line of code to wrap. This is the experiment condition, and here's control. And then there's a dashboard where anyone can, roll out the experiment to more users. It can estimate what kind of power we need, so how many people need to see this experiment before we'll have statistically significant results. And it'll show people, confidence intervals and whether it's significant or not. And the goal with that is to make it that, all the experts in data science have built this system so that you don't have to be an expert to use it. So you don't need a data scientist. Any PM or engineer, anyone in the company really can go look at these experiment reports that are generated every night and kind of know how an experiment's doing. They can see core metrics and guardrails. And that really helps us move very, very fast. And then,
what happens if it's no good? So I launched my experiment. I'm ready to have it fail because 50% will, although I have to say 50% is a really great hit rate for experiments, I think. But so I'm going to do it, and then I'm like, OK, I hope it works. But if not, I've learned. What if it wasn't good? What happens?
So there's a shutdown button. There's launch and shutdown buttons.
Kill button.
Yep. So instantly the experiment will completely go away, and then we can clean up the code later. But yeah, the learners would stop seeing the experiment right away.
Is this like A/B testing?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
OK,
absolutely.
so it's essentially A/B testing. We did with this experiment. We did this. Without it, it was that.
Mm-hmm.
Should we continue? Should we? OK.
Yep.
All right. Super. Innovating faster, giving people freedom to innovate, removing the complexity, taking the risk out of this, considering an A/B testing framework would be maybe something that everybody should think about. What platform, homegrown or use a third-party tool? I think that the homegrown thing is interesting, but regardless, it's like it's a new product in your organization to say, let's have a product for experimentation. It's an internally focused product, which will help us get a better read on what customers respond to, and if we can find compound incremental growth as well as our big bets. Test things with customers right away, right? So your ship it is get it in front of customers so we can find out as fast as possible and get that compound growth going faster, right? And then, so iterate and ship, shut down the stuff that's not working. OK, so now this is another one that I love. I think this is my favorite sort of new way of thinking about experimentation. Tell us about copy-then-innovate.
I think you gave me credit for this idea, but technically I think I copied it from Picasso, but ironically.
Great. So yeah, what did Picasso have in mind?
Yeah. So basically, the idea here is that there's a great starting point, so you don't have to prove yourself by trying to make the most brilliant feature right from the start. This image up here shows 3 of the leaderboards that we had in the app in 2018. And they were all just really not working, but we saw a lot of leaderboards working out really well in other places. And so we decided what would happen if we copied the people who were doing this the best. So we looked at a lot of casual mobile games, and we looked at a lot of them, and we noticed there was kind of a convergence in certain features. And what we saw that as is a signal that these features were effective. It's kind of like billions of people were treated in various A/B tests, and it was almost a genetic algorithm. You sorted it out and got kind of the winning general template. So we copied that as a starting point. In most of our experiments, they'll move a metric, like part of a percent or maybe 1%. But this new leaderboard, it increased the amount of sessions people do per day by 18%, which is something we almost never see.
So it's really amazing because I think a lot of teams who are building product feel the need to do sort of bespoke and highly differentiated, unique work on everything they experiment with, right? Like, let's make it bigger and better and disruptive and so forth. But there's many cases in which we can take something and plug it in and just see if it works. Like, it's part of the test process. You could have later gone back and done created something highly differentiated and bespoke, or you could just say, well, let's use the parts that are already solved and are working, and then only increment on what's differentiated for us, right? And incremental innovation. So I think that's really interesting. And as an innovator and somebody who works in product all the time, I don't think I would have, before this session, said proudly, I copy and then I innovate. But I'm going to adopt it because I think it's super effective for getting people to move faster towards finding out if concepts even work in the first place versus taking the pressure off. Let's custom do something that's highly different from the start. Because what if the leaderboard hadn't been fantastic?
Yep.
And you saved yourself many months, maybe a year of development. So that's fantastic. Let's talk about embracing a product-centric approach. I talked at the outset about how we at Amazon use the idea of mechanisms, which is like how we approach processes that are repeatable to make them scalable across the whole entire organization, and kind of having like inputs and outputs and then inspection in the middle to see, is there a better way? Should we be evolving how we're working? But we have a standard way of thinking about inputs and outputs. It's a product-centric mindset. And it's basically can be extended to like the whole entire organization. Not just how do we build product for customers who are expecting product, but how do we build solutions for internally for what we need to do, like you built an experimentation platform. That's an example of an internal-facing product that you can continually use and improve to make you better at experimentation. Where else are you using a product-centric mindset at Duolingo?
We try to use it all over. One of the more interesting cases, I think, is when marketing is actually using kind of the green machine, as we call it.
What's the green machine?
So the green machine's like the name that we have for our kind of like rapid iteration loop. So not every part of the company is able to do green machine always. So we refer to this as like coming up with hypotheses, running experiments, learning from them, and quickly iterating on that. So yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, in the product-centric mindset, teams have missions. Whether it's the marketing team that's trying to do something new. You gave me a good example, I think, in a conversation before about. Was it TikTok?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Unpack that one for us.
Yeah. So some of you might be familiar with our TikTok. It's kind of like popular now. We had a brilliant social media manager, Zaria Parvez, kind of created our TikTok and got that going. But it doesn't really stop there. So they now do kind of green machine iterations on that. So one of the things that's interesting about TikTok for us is that not all of our popular TikToks will drive new users. So marketing has a screen. It's the coolest name of any screen in the app. It's called a Heidi How screen. It's an acronym for How Did You Hear About Us? And that screen asks people where they came from. So one of the options is TikTok. So when we have a really popular TikTok post, sometimes it will drive new users and sometimes it won't, and we can see that. So marketing started to look at the data that they had and kind of try to piece together why some of them were driving new users and some weren't. And they came up with a hypothesis. They're like, hey, when we lean into a specific fandom that's already really popular in our base, and there's a whole bunch of data behind how they figured that out, but if they lean into a specific fandom, that seems to drive new users. So they found INO112, which is a K-pop group, and they found that was really popular with our TikTok crowd. Created a bunch of content, just having fun talking about INO112. And that caused the INO112 fans to share it out to their groups. So now the rest of the INO112 fandom that was not also part of the Duolingo fandom kind of were new to seeing us and kind of came in, and that drove a lot of new users. So they got that data from that experiment. It worked out really well. And now that's kind of a formula that they use to run more experiments.
So basically, the marketing team has a culture of experimentation now, adopting the same mental models and creating their own mechanisms, their own internal productization of how do we try something, have a mission to drive engagement through TikTok as an example, iterate on what's the best way to do it. At some point, it's working. At some point, it's sunset that and go for the next thing, right? So this product operating model is about ramping up what's working, sunsetting what's not, and experimenting and iterating even on how we operate, also on the products we build for our customers. So teams have missions drive the products, and the products are for the customers. And in a product-centric model, success is measurable. Each team has a mission to drive certain results that are customer-oriented and knows how to measure that and is honest about whether the metrics are going in the right direction or whether we need to sunset. So that's really experimentation-oriented. Okay, and then the last piece of what I said we'd talk about is it turns out, on top of all of this culture stuff, that the engineering actually really matters. It matters a lot. The way you're doing experimentation, the clip you're doing experimentation, at the rate you're doing experimentation all across the company, engineering matters a lot. So tell us a little bit about how you think about technology and engineering, and I think there's a lot of parallels too to how Amazon thinks about it as well.
Yeah, it's a kind of the engine behind the whole thing. So since speed matters so much, the engineering choices that we make really kind of drive that. So we have product teams that are doing all these hundreds of experiments, but if it wasn't for infrastructure and platform, they wouldn't be able to move that fast. So one of the things that the company's been doing, or started a long time ago, is breaking down its monolith into microservices, very common going on right now. My starter task when I joined Duolingo, we have all our managers do a quarter of IC work. My first task was to pull the first microservice out, the school's microservice, the monolith. So that's been really helpful. Now the infrastructure and platform teams are migrating from AWS's ECS into EKS, doing the Kubernetes thing. We follow the golden path, which is a concept we borrowed from Spotify.
Tell us about the golden path.
Sure. It's so basically there's this concept of golden path where you have a set of languages and features and versions where if you use the supported set of versions, you get automatic updates because enough services are all using these same versions that we can scan them for security vulnerabilities and check for updates and things like that, and those will all get patched immediately. But it's very opt-in. So a service can choose whether or not to follow the golden path, or if they really need to use a different language or a different version of something, they can kind of choose to go the other way, but then they're kind of responsible for their own maintenance of it. So
yeah, it's super interesting. So the picture you have here of full service and self-service, I borrowed that from our culture of innovation presentation, which is like our mindset about architecture. So yes, there's a definite break down the monoliths, break it down into microservices and services that are available as a host of building blocks to builders. Let people innovate. Let them just go help themselves to whichever technology services they need to put together what they have. A common question I get is, okay, so if you're going to let people have a full array of services and self-service, how do you govern that? Right? What's the governance model around what they're using and whether it's the best approach? So I think this golden path idea is really interesting, which is you don't want to stand in the way of experimentation and innovation and pace by having people wait in line to get permission to use something. You're saying, here's a golden path. Here's a bunch of things you can use that you're going to be, maintenance is built in, upgrades are built in, security is built in. You're good to go. If you want to go choose something else because it's better for your mission, better for you driving metrics for your customers and for the business faster, you may do that, but you've got to take care of it, right? You've got to take full ownership of that and build that into the plan. I think that's a super interesting way to do it. So we're going to open it up to questions. Before I take the questions, I just wanted to summarize some of the key points that we've made along the way, and hopefully that'll remind everybody where we've been in the conversation and help you generate some more questions before we get into it. We talked about focusing on customer and on product. We talked about that culture sets the tone. Experiments lead to rapid growth in the business. Customers must come first. We are open to copy and then innovate, and we're definitely testing and iterating and sunsetting what doesn't work and doubling down on what does. We're embracing a product-centric mindset, and engineering matters. And along the way, experiments lead to growth. It is proven the way you've done experiments, at the pace you're doing experiments, that even when the gains are incremental, 1% this, 0.5% there, if you can get that going and the compound effect of that incremental experimentation, it can really have a hockey stick effect on your growth curve, which is what we like to look for. We want to be scaling the experiments that work. We want to be continuously innovating across our organization, not just in product, but everywhere in the organization. And it's a product-centric approach that we're embracing. And basically, this focus on delivering value to customers, in your case, engagement for those users that have that sustainable need to build a habit, strategic focus for you, that if you can deliver to that, you can get those compound effects that really make the difference. That's how I thought about the summarization of what I learned in speaking to Sean and preparing for this.